Hi everybody, this is Laura, City Scrapper. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel today. Today I have a layout that I made using the August My Creative Scrapbook limited edition kit. I'm starting out this layout with this absolutely beautiful piece of 49 and market paper. The paper is very subtle. It has gorgeous colors in the background. I thought that I would add some white splatters because I'm going to be using this cut file, and I thought that it would be a good idea to bring some white into the background since the cut file is white. I backed the cut file with some pattern papers from the kit. This cut file is available to anyone who subscribes to a My Creative Scrapbook kit. I cover the back of the cut file with ATG adhesive, and then I get it positioned correctly on the page, just double checking to make sure that all of the words are straight. I also did some stitching on this cut file. I used some white embroidery thread and I stitched around the inside of each of the larger letters that I backed with a pattern paper. Usually when I use a cut file, I stitch on it. I just love the texture that adds to the cut file. Now I have a whole bunch of strips of paper. They are slightly different heights and different widths. I used some Distress Oxide in weathered wood and I inked the edges of all of them. Now I'm using a piece of 120-pound cardstock and I'm covering it with ATG adhesive, and I'm going to place each of these strips of paper on the larger piece of paper. My plan is to cut this large piece of paper into smaller strips and use it on the top and the bottom of the layout. So I put the pieces of paper down, trying to vary the colors that I'm putting next to each other and trying to spread out the different widths that I have. Most of the strips of paper I'm using are neutral. They are gray and off-white, and I was thinking that I should be careful about where I put the strips of yellow since that seems to be the most noticeable of the pattern papers. After I had all the papers attached down, I trimmed the edges and then I cut this strip of paper into 4 pieces. I was originally just going to have a strip on the top and the bottom, but I tried that on the layout and I didn't like the way it looked, so I decided to go instead with some very thin strips of paper, and they're going to go all the way around the layout. Once again, I inked all of the edges with the weathered wood Distress Oxide, and now I'm creating two 45-degree angles on 2 of the strips of paper, and I'm going to layer all these strips of paper together to make a frame around the outside of the layout. This technique of using lots of strips of layered paper next to each other is something that I use constantly on my layouts. I just love the way it looks when all of the different colors of the collection or of the kit are brought together with all of the pattern papers being so close to each other. I attach the 2 solid strips on the top and the bottom of the layout, and then I attach the 2 strips that I cut 45-degree angles on either side, and it gives a bit of an illusion of a frame all the way around the layout. I often use 1/2 inch strips of paper for this layout since I use different widths of the strips of paper. The corners don't match up in the same way. In the upper left-hand corner, you could see how the strips of paper kind of lined up, but not necessarily in the other corners. But that doesn't bother me. I like the idea of using different widths of paper and mixing it up a little bit because usually I always use 1/2 inch strips. I wanted to have this yellowish color around my photo, and I only had a few strips of it left. So I decided that I would do the same thing that I did with the large layout, but just do it on a smaller scale. So right now I'm creating a small frame for my photo. I have these strips of a 1/2 inch or about 1/2 an inch, and I'm just going to cut them into a frame shape, and that will be what I mount my photo on. I followed the same steps for this smaller frame that I did for the larger layout. I cut the strips of paper in the same way. I made 45-degree angles on the corners of 2 of them, and 2 of them I left uncut. I inked the edges of the papers, and then I layered them on this piece of cardstock, and then I mount my photo, which has already been mounted on some white cardstock on top of the yellow, and now I have a nice little yellow frame around my photo. I attach that right down to the layout in the upper right hand side. And then I wanted to make some photo corners, and I still have a little bit of that yellow paper left. So I use an EK Success scalped photo corner punch, and I punch out some photo corners for my photo. This month, the kit was a mixture of 49 and market papers and Bow Bunny papers, and I absolutely love the addition of this yellowish color with the 49 and market papers. I just think that the collections just look fantastic together. I'm using some ATG adhesive, and I'm attaching those photo corners down to the layout. And you might have seen earlier, I used the weathered wood once again to ink the edges of the papers. And now I'm using some of the embellishments that were in the kit. I'm using a lot of chipboard pieces, some of the ephemera pieces. I love putting butterflies on my layouts. I also really loved this bird that I put to the right of the word day. I just thought that it was a great size for that spot, and I absolutely love to put birds on my layouts as well. I'm also using some of the dimensional flowers that came in the kit, and again, this beautiful yellowish color I just thought brightened up the whole layout. When I have a big cut file on the page that is very large and takes up the majority of the background, I approach the embellishing a little differently. Usually I try to make clusters, usually 3 clusters or sometimes 4 with the title cluster. But for this layout, I'm thinking more about what spaces the cut file leaves for me to embellish and trying to kind of decorate those areas. In addition to the 2 large floral clusters, I have a lot of embellishments that are distributed around the page. I put some sentiments in the lower left-hand corner. One says all in good time, one says joy in living, and another one says days to remember. And now I'm going around the layout and I'm attaching all of these chipboard and paper elements down to the page. Of course, the chipboard has some adhesive on it already, but I like to reinforce it with a little bit more of the adhesive that I use. The photo for this layout is of an abandoned building. There's a whole complex of abandoned buildings not too far from my house. It used to be a mental health facility, and it was just totally vacated suddenly quite a few decades ago, and it just still sits there. Parts of it are still abandoned and parts of it have been repurposed. There's a banquet hall in one of the buildings, there's a school in another one of the buildings, but many of the buildings just sit there abandoned and decaying. My older daughter went through a stage where she was visiting there and taking photographs, and I really liked the photographs that she took when she was there. And I think that even though it's kind of a sad story, the ruins that are left behind are kind of cool. And even though the doors are open and people go there all the time, I always consider it a bit of an adventure because it is, of course, an abandoned building. I feel like you have to be careful there. So I used to always go with her, or my husband and I would go with her sometimes too. I have popped up the butterflies on some foam, something that I absolutely love to do. I love adding a little bit of dimension to the butterflies. To attach the flowers down to the layout, I'm using some heavy gel medium. I use the matte medium. It also comes in gloss. And this is a really strong adhesive, and I think it's just perfect for holding these dimensional flowers in place. Once I had everything glued down to the layout, I was thinking that I wanted to add a little bit of white to the flowers, so I'm using some heavy gesso and a really old bristle brush, and I'm dabbing the gesso onto the tips or the edges of all of these flowers. Sometimes I like to add diamond dust to the flowers. Sometimes the flowers are left as they are. But for this layout, the subject is kind of rustic. So I was thinking that adding a little bit of white to the edges would be the best match. I'm adding some more chipboard pieces. Since I had the gel medium handy, I figured I would just use that to attach down those chipboard leaves. Excuse my head being in this part of the video. I decided to change the photo corners. I like the yellow photo corners, but I tried this pattern and I liked it a little bit better, so I just layered the new ones on top of the old ones. And now I'm adding a few die cuts to the layout. I just wanted to add a little something just around the flowers. This is one of my favorite dyes to use when I just want to add a little touch of something to flowers like these. I don't know the manufacturer. I bought this a long time ago, probably on eBay, but I have seen a lot of dyes that are similar to this where they look like little berries or little buds. And I think that the fact that they're very light and wispy helps to add a little bit of texture to the clusters that have flowers in them, but it doesn't overwhelm the layout. And then I was thinking that I would add just a few more of these die cuts in some other areas. I was thinking that the area right by that little chipmunk would be a good place to add a few. And now I'm using some gel glue and I'm attaching all of these pieces down to the layout. I'm adding some self-adhesive pearls from my stash. I'm putting one on each of the photo corners. And then I was thinking that I would add some very tiny pearls to the areas that have the large flowers. These are extremely tiny pearls, and so I'm using some tweezers to help me position them on the page. I just bought these tweezers at the drugstore and they seem to work pretty well for handling these very tiny little items. These pearls are extremely small and they're not super noticeable, but I like the idea of adding lots of different types of textures to the page. I just think that it adds to the overall look of layouts. The pearls are the very last touch that I add to the page, and here are some close-ups. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to watch this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it. Thank you for sticking with me to the end. And I want to say thank you for every view and every like and every comment. I really appreciate all of your support and it means a lot to me. Thank you so much. And I wanted to say thank you for all of your views and all of your likes. And thank you so much for those really supportive comments. I really, really appreciate them. The link to the My Creative Scrapbook website is in the description box if you'd like to check out this or any of the kits that are available this month. I hope you have a fantastic day. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.